So you know what happened, right? So you know that the House passed a $40 billion Ukraine aid bill. $40 billion, just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Imagine if they took $1 billion and gave it to 40 cities in the United States to solve homelessness and fix their infrastructure. Imagine if they did that. You know, maybe we could have clean water in America. Maybe, you know, Flint and by the way, people always say Flint as the symbol because it's just a symbol because there's lead in the pipes all around the country. Mm-hmm. It's not just in Flint, but they still haven't fixed it. And what would it cost? I don't know, couple of $1 million. What would it cost?
Wouldn't be much. Wouldn't be much.
Yeah, and they just won't do it. So, but they will do this at the drop of a hat. Why? Because the people who are in power, the people who are elected to serve us, they're not elected to serve us, okay? They're chosen, they're pre-selected by the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, big pharma, healthcare, and oil subsidies, and oil companies subsidies, and big tech. They're pre-chosen by the oligarchy. There's only a handful of billionaires who run this entire goddamn country, and this is proof of that. And because why wouldn't they just do this? Why wouldn't the Democrats just go $40 billion to 40 cities and they would get reelected forever, just like FDR did? But they're not. They won't do it. Why?
Or to anything we got going on. I mean, we have a baby formula shortage. Why not look into addressing that? I mean, we've already sent $20 billion to Ukraine. This would make it $60 billion almost in 10 weeks. That's like as much as we basically sent a State Department over to Ukraine, or would have. We would have sent like a whole Twitter and a half over to Ukraine.
And the thing that's crazy about this, Jackson, is when they passed this, every Democrat voted for it, including people who are supposed to represent the disenfranchised black and brown people. And we know they just went along with the military-industrial complex, meaning every member of the squad, every single member of the squad voted without argument, without objection, without any kind of discussion, to give $40 billion in aid, which is $7 billion more than Joe Biden even asked for. That's how corrupt they are. Mm-hmm. But guess what? 57 Republicans voted against it. Jimmy, why would they be doing that? Because the Democratic Party is going through a realignment. They are fully and 100% a right-wing pro-war party, even more so than the Republicans. Now it takes the Republicans to stand up and give the anti-war message. And you mean like Republicans that everybody likes, Republicans who are reasonable and moderate? No, I'm talking about the people they point to as crazy. The Democrats are so craven and corrupt that they can make these people look like truth tellers. Who am I talking about? Marjorie Taylor Greene. They were trying to get her disbarred from running. And now you're going to find out why, because she's willing to tell the truth about our foreign policy. Apparently, she didn't get the call from the CIA yet.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the Ukrainian supplemental bill. $40 billion. But there's no baby formula for American mothers and babies.
Now, there's a poem written in 1970 called Whitey's on the Moon. Can you find that and send me it? Send me the lyrics, or called Whitey's on the Moon. And in that poem, he would say, a rat just bit my little sister, but Whitey's on the moon. We can't afford breakfast, but Whitey's on the moon. Because that was right after Whitey had gone to the moon. And it was kind of like their version of, we can put a man on the moon, but we can't get housing to poor kids. We can't get nutrition. So that's what she's going to say. She's going to do, this is the 2022 white person's version of Whitey's on the Moon. Right? Have you found it?
Yep. I'm going to send you the lyrics right now.
Who wrote it?
It looks like sung. I only have sung by Gil Scott Heron.
That's
Let me
it.
See.
Okay, ready? Here we go.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the Ukrainian supplemental bill. $40 billion. But there's no baby formula for American mothers and babies. An unknown amount of money to the CIA in the Ukraine supplemental bill, but there's no formula for American babies and mothers. $54 million in COVID spending in Ukraine, but there's no formula for American babies and mothers. $900 million for nonprofits and organizations in Ukraine, but there's no formula for American babies and mothers. $8.7 billion for economic support and funding in Ukraine, but there's no formula for American mothers and babies. If this is about claiming that it's about saving lives, let's be real, then we would care about war-torn countries like Ethiopia. So that's a bunch of hypocrisy.
So when you hear someone mention the war-torn country like Ethiopia that's no one is mentioning, don't you think that's something that Ilhan Omar or Rashid Tlaib or Pramila Jayapal or AOC or Ro Khanna, don't you think that's the argument that they would be making?
You'd think. I mean, they've said that they're anti-war, but now they're here openly supporting this effort to send $40 billion over to Ukraine.
They're anti-war when it's absolutely 100% easy to be anti-war because their Democratic leadership has told them it's okay to go be anti-war because you speaking anti-war-like will have no consequence on what we do in Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, or Ethiopia. But you can't do that in Ukraine. And so they won't say anything about Ukraine. They're not even bringing up Ethiopia. Nothing. They're leaving it up to someone that they like to call a lunatic, fringe, maniac, white supremacist. Why is she speaking up for Ethiopia? This crazy, lunatic, white supremacist and not AOC or Ilhan Omar or Ro Khanna? Because we all know why. They're phonies. They're frauds. That's why. So she's got more to say.
Because I never hear Ethiopia brought up here. Totally ignoring, completely ignoring our own border crisis, our own baby formula crisis, and brutal inflation, skyrocketing gas prices that no one can afford, but $40 billion for Ukraine? Stop funding regime change and money laundering scams and U.S. politician cover-ups of their crimes in countries like Ukraine. The American people do not support paying for constant U.S. involvement in foreign affairs while our own government fails our own country. Let me remind everyone here, we swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America and our borders. We should be paying attention to our country right now. I yield back. Thank you.
So what I say to that is, it's when people say about Tucker Carlson, I go, shame on MSNBC and CNN for letting Tucker Carlson take the anti-war mantle. Why is he the only one telling the truth about Syria, about Libya, about Iran, about Venezuela? Why is Tucker Carlson the only one telling the truth? Oh, well, now with Laura Ingraham. Why is Fox News the only people telling you the truth about Ukraine? And shame on everybody else. You can't even get the truth about Ukraine from fucking YouTube hosts. Go to the Young Turks, see what they tell you about Ukraine. They're going to tell you exactly what their handler at the CIA told them to say. That it's a noble. We got to stand up to Putin. We got to protect the Ukrainians, which the exact opposite is happening. The exact opposite.
We got to send another $40 billion over to the Azovites, right?
That's right.
Help them out.
We're literally funding Nazis in Ukraine, and that's almost doesn't matter because the bigger story is there's no way Ukraine is going to prevail in this war, and everybody knows it. As Danny Boy Hinkle has said on the show before, the way this war is going to end is exactly how Putin wants it to end. That's how it's going to end. And he's going to choose when. And we all know this. And all this is a transfer of wealth from you, the American taxpayer, upwards to the international military-industrial complex. That's all this is. Here's what Marjorie Taylor Greene, Caitlin Johnstone says, Marjorie Taylor Greene being better than progressive Democrats on Ukraine is noteworthy, not because it makes Greene look good. I actually think it does. But because it makes those progressive Democrats look really, really, really bad. what's weird is someone says, thanks for saying this to Caitlin Johnstone. Thanks for saying this. I'm getting really confused about my own personal morals and ethics. I don't think I've changed, but lately I'm agreeing with unexpected people in a shocking disagreement with people I love and respect. Crazy times indeed. So this is why people would come up to me ever since Russiagate started and Bernie decided to not hold the Democratic Party accountable for cheating him and cheating his followers. Ever since that, and I've been telling the truth about the Democratic Party and Russiagate, people have been coming up to me coast to coast, wherever I go, saying, thank you for keeping me sane. And that's what this means, because these people are like, they look around and they're like, wait a minute, am I crazy? Because everyone else seems to be telling me propaganda. Is it me or is it them? And they're not sure. And I get it. Because I've been that way too. It's like, is it possible that I'm Jimmy Dore, pothead comedian in his garage? Somehow I'm getting this right when 99% of everyone else is getting it wrong? Turns out, yes. Turns out it's not that hard to do a better job in journalism than everybody in it.
The craziest part about this bill also is that they gave it to these members of Congress. They dumped it on their desks at around 3 p.m.
Oh, so we're going to get that. I'm going to show that.
Get to that.
I'm going to show Chip's video that you sent me.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so right down here, this person says, I was thinking exactly that yesterday when I found myself agreeing with Rand Paul on need for oversight when shoveling $40 billion at the kleptocracy in Ukraine. Yes. So now it seems like the only people ever speaking up for lefty points of view are rabid right-wingers. Thomas Massey talking about no-fly zone in Syria and in Ukraine, how crazy that is. Rand Paul saying the government is the biggest misinformation spewer in the country. Rand Paul standing up and saying we want oversight on $40 billion. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene telling the truth about Ukraine funding. And so now all those people on YouTube whose views are dwindling and dwindling, they keep doing Marjorie Taylor Greene video after Marjorie Taylor Greene video. And you know who I'm talking about, the usual suspects, the NBC contract boys, the Kyle Kalinskis, the TYTs, the shit libs. They can't stop with their Tucker Carlson, still doing Donald Trump videos, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. That's the Ben Shapiro. That's the entirety of their fucking catalog now. They do no news. They do just clickbait hate on right-wingers. I wonder how they're going to cover Marjorie Taylor Greene. Have you seen any coverage of this from those usual suspects, Jackson?
No, I haven't. Like you said, I just continue to see them doing these cheap, smear videos against them without actually acknowledging the substance of the most important issues of our time when it comes to this World War III that is essentially breaking out in Ukraine. I mean, no mention from any of those people as to what Chomsky said about Trump when Trump was advocating for peace. No
Did they
mention
cover that? They didn't cover that either. They didn't honestly. They didn't cover that that Chomsky agrees that Trump is the only statesman calling for a peace in Ukraine. They didn't. Nobody covered that. Besides, you covered it, I'm sure, right?
Of course.
I covered it.
It's huge.
I covered it. Is that it? Is that the entirety of the coverage that got?
I think so.
In America,
at the end of the day, the shit libs they worship these globalist leaders that are neoconservatives and neoliberals alike that are fomenting this war. And it's us populists on the right and left that are calling the balls and strikes.
How's Breaking Point's doing on this? I haven't seen their coverage. Have you?
I haven't either. I think it's just maybe
was they're bad on China. I know that.
Horrible on China.
Horrible
on China. I think they probably wouldn't have too dissimilar of takes from Kyle Kalinske.
Okay, so. Here's a crazy Democrat going to respond to Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Marjorie Taylor Greene just laid down a bunch of truth that is super refreshing to hear being said on the floor of Congress. And shame on the Democrats for not saying that themselves and ceding the anti-war lane to someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Michael Tracy tweets out, Marjorie Taylor Greene said last night that $40 billion for Ukraine, but there's no baby formula for American mothers and babies. Stop funding regime change and money laundering scams. Here's how Jamie Raskin, Democrat, responded on behalf of the House Democrats, which is now a 100% war-crazed party. You want to hear how he responded? Here's how he responded.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy. Repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So immediately called a Putin puppet. I'll play it again. Let me play it again.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy. Repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So you see, mentioning baby formula is undermining democracy, I guess. Pushing a proxy war in Ukraine is strengthening democracy. So what he's doing there is making Democrats look bad. That's what Marjorie Taylor did. She made Democrats look bad. And that's a form of disinformation. And everyone who isn't a Russian asset knows that. And that's what he's saying. She's doing the Russia's bidding. You see, misinformation is information that isn't true. Disinformation is information that comes from people we hate. A cat lady saying that to me on a TikTok. So that's, and watch the woman behind. So I want you to watch this woman in the blue as he starts to do the red baiting. Watch how she starts to smile and enjoy it. Watch this. This is great.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy. Repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So calling, that's it. You're an appeaser. Anybody who's anti-war, you're immediately not patriotic enough. You're siding with our enemy. You're a traitor, and you're an appeaser. And now you're destroying democracy. Watch her face. Watch her face again. Watch it.
Here's
She's
a
serious.
formula for the destruction of democracy. Repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and
so as he goes into that horrible propaganda of red baiting, she giggles to herself. Why? Because she knows what they're doing. Go ahead, Jackson.
It's amazing because she knows what they're doing. It's the same thing they're doing to all people who want to bring the truth forward when it comes to Russiagate or Hunter Biden's laptop or COVID. They just censor. They refuse to participate in debate, even on the House floor. And they just deny, and censor people when they try to bring up valid points and arguments.
So that's what they respond with. So what has happened here, in case no one's noticing, the parties have flipped when it comes to foreign policy. The Republicans used to be crazy war hawks, and you associate war hawkery with a right-wing position. Now the Democrats are the right-wingers, and the Republicans are the anti-war lefties. So that's all that. That's Republican right-wing red-baiting bullshit. But Democrats have been doing this since I can remember, at least since the Iraq War. If you were against the Iraq War, you were a Saddam puppet. And then if you're against Syria, you're a Assadist. If you're against Libya, you were a Gaddafiist. If you were against that, it's the same thing. Now, if you're against Ukraine, you're a Putin puppet. And that's the interesting thing here. All the Democrats are for this, and they're red baiting anybody who's against it as anti-American and a Putin puppet. And 57 Republicans voiced the truth about it and voted against it. So that's supposed to be the opposite. You're supposed to have 57 progressives in unity voting against this and calling a press conference and AOC, and they're all supposed to say what's wrong with this and our leadership. None of them are doing anything. They're going right along with it. But if it's any consolidation, most of that $40 billion will not actually help anybody in the Ukraine, if that helps. Michael Tracy goes on to say, even progressive Democrats have no ability or willingness to defend their war-escalating policy on the merits. So they reflexively scream appeasement and disinformation rhetoric they would have undoubtedly associated with hardcore, right-wing, pro-war troglodytes in the past. Raskin in particular, so that guy who just red-baited Marjorie Taylor Greene for doing that, called her destroying democracy and blah, blah, when he ran, the Washington Post said he was the most liberal congressional candidate in a crowded field. What does that tell you? Raskin, in particular, was heralded as an incredibly savvy, progressive constitutional law professor when he was first elected in 2016. Now he's fulminating on the floor of the House that anyone who opposes open-ended U.S. military escalation is a despicable isolationist. That's how far we've slid. But I also think so you're going to destroy, so that's the guy. So this guy said, if you tell the truth about Ukraine, if you bring up baby formula, you're going to destroy democracy. That's the formula for destroying democracy, bringing up the baby food thing. Well, I guess it's good that babies are starving if it helps democracy. I didn't know Putin was putting out propaganda that we should have enough food for our babies. That's Putin propaganda now, that the United States should have enough food for their babies. Did he also advocate for free speech too, that fucking maniac? So, Cocktail Hag tweeted out that awkward moment when a right-wing nutcase makes the Democrats look like the pieces of shit they are. Here's another right-winger. This is a guy named Chip Roy. He is a Republican from Texas. And here's what he said on the floor of the House about this $40 billion. Imagine if they took $1 billion and gave it to 40 cities in America, or they took $2 billion and gave it to the 20 biggest cities in America. $2 billion to go do whatever. You could build a new sports stadium for $1 billion. You know how many jobs that creates? Just do something stupid like that. Well, you could probably clean up homelessness in each one of those cities. You could probably end it. And you could probably create a lot of jobs helping people end it. Like, I don't know, creating affordable housing for those people. Shit like that. Hiring mental health professionals, people to take care of them. We got the money. Imagine if we actually gave $2 billion and told each city, hey, why don't you put this into your infrastructure? Hey, put this into public transportation. Imagine if we did something like that. We're not doing anything. So here is another Republican, Chip Roy, and watch what he says.
1 minute. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The gentleman from Maryland talked about protecting this institution, but we got a $40 billion bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't had a chance to review the bill. My staff is poring over the pages, trying to see what's in it. You want to talk about the institution? You want to talk about standing up alongside Ukraine? Why don't we actually have a debate on the floor of the People's House instead of the garbage of getting a $40 billion bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, not paid for, without having any idea what's really in it, with a massive slush fund that goes to the State Department, $13 billion, $8 billion for the Economic Support Fund, $110 million for embassy security. We've got $40 billion that is unpaid for, and you want to sit here and lecture this body about what we're going to do or not do about standing alongside Ukraine? Why don't we talk about the American people who are hurting, the wide open borders, the inflation that's killing people, the jobs that people can't get because of the cost of goods and services in this country? Sitting here and being lectured to when I don't even have time to look at a $40 billion unpaid bill. I make a motion to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
So those are the Democrats saying, no, let's keep going so we can pass this $40 billion bill without discussion or debate or input. $40 billion. Imagine if they wanted to give $40 billion to poor people or $40 billion in health care. There would be fucking town halls from coast to coast 24/7. Anderson Cooper would put on a t-shirt and go talk to people in the streets, and Chris Hayes would roll up his shirt up to his elbows and go interview right-wingers. It would be amazing television, and they would talk about it forever, and it would never get done. We would never get that $40 billion in aid, because that would be reckless, and that would not be fiduciary responsible.
Do you remember like last week when all the liberals on Twitter were just losing their minds about the fact that a private citizen, Elon Musk, decided he wanted to spend $44 billion to bring free speech to Twitter? And then now they're all cheerleading on the idea of sending $40 billion in taxpayer dollars to the most corrupt country in Europe for a pointless proxy war against Russia.
They're saying that people were, those shit libs were on Twitter saying, why doesn't Elon Musk use that $44 billion to end homelessness or to do this or do another good thing? Well, why don't they say that now? Well,
now they're condemning Marjorie Taylor Greene for speaking out against this.
And here, let me play this again.
1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the gentleman from Maryland talked about protecting this institution or talked about this institution, but we got a $40 billion bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't had a chance to review the bill. My staff is poring over the pages, trying to see what's in it. You want to talk about the institution? You want to talk about standing up alongside Ukraine? Why don't we actually have a debate on the floor of the People's House instead of the garbage of getting a $40 billion bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Did you know that most democracy happens at 3 p.m. in the afternoon? Did you know that? So that democratically elected representatives don't have time to read the bills. Then that's to reduce the chances of democratically not doing what the security states wants, which might harm our democracy. So too much democracy stops the CIA from implementing their new wars. And you can't stop a war democratically. And so we just have to limit democracy. And that's what we do. We democratically introduce democratically passed bills at 3 p.m. when no one gets to read them. And then democracy helps out the imperialism. That's the system.
No debate.
No debate. Nobody knows where the money's going.
When I first heard his speech, all I could think of was like, he said, my entire staff is poring over this, trying to figure out what's in this bill. And all I could imagine was the bill getting slapped on AOC's desk and her telling her staff, like, no, don't worry about it. Like, we're just gonna pass this one through. You know, the insanity of these squad members calling themselves anti-war still is just so crazy.
Of them calling themselves progressive. You're
progressive, again, whatever, you know.
They're called. I think they're called Pinos, progressive in name only.
I like that.
They're Pinos. Hey, Pino! Hey, Pino! Hey, Pino! And so they even got AOC. By the way, I want to talk $40 billion. Do you know how much, I say this before, but it's a great number, so I'll say it again. You know how much money the entire recording music industry generates in a year? The entire, and that's from everybody from whoever is popular right now to Beethoven, all right? I'm talking everything that's ever produced in a year. Do you know how much money the recording music? $12 billion a year.
What?
Yes, that's everything. That's what the entirety of music generates in 1 year in the United States, $12 billion. We're giving 3 times that, just like that, to another country. And it's not to another country. It's to the military-industrial complex. So that's the idea that your representatives they don't represent you. They represent their fucking hand chosen by the oligarchy. And that's proof that that's how this works. And they set the agenda. And they tell Mama Bear, Nancy Pelosi, and spineless tool Chuck Schumer what to do because they give them the most money. And then the squad gets elected and they do what Nancy Pelosi tells them. So voting for the squad is just like voting for Nancy Pelosi. You're voting for Goldman Sachs. So you got to stop voting for Democrats. No matter how appealing they seem, you got to stop doing that. I met an appealing Democrat in Des Moines. I said, sorry, I don't care how radical you are. You can't be a Democrat. I'm done. And AOC, what is the carbon footprint of a proxy war with Russia you just voted to fund? That's Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's again out-lefting the squad with ease. With ease. That's the kind of shit they should be tweeting out. That's the kind of concerns they should be bringing up at a press conference. That's the kind of stuff they should tell people to get in the street and march over. But instead, the squad is voting for it. They're not opposing it. They're implementing it. They're your oppressor. They're not the best chance we have for fucking anything. When you hear dipshits say that kind of stuff, that the squad is the best we've got, we don't have them. The military-industrial complex, Big Pharma, and Wall Street has them, you fucking jackass. AOC, what is the carbon footprint? I love this. It's okay. I'm sure she'll wear an End All Wars dress to the next luxurious affair she attends. Then someone comes back and says, well, there it is. That's the dumbest thing I've ever read all day. Talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Responding to her. That's dumb? So I love what Shauna Burley says right underneath. Says, why is that dumb? Because you can't comprehend the environmental consequences of the war you are promoting? It is dumb. When you figure in all the people being killed in this war, it offsets the carbon footprint. When did you start caring about the environment, Marjorie Taylor Greene? That's their response. Marjorie Taylor Greene makes a salient point about the environment and the greenhouse gas and the effect of war on it, $40 billion worth. And someone says, when did you start caring about the environment? That's the question that needs to be answered. Fuck, no, it's not. That is not the question that needs to be answered. When did you stop caring about the environment? That would be a more relevant question because you just converted somebody. Why does that need to be answered, says Shauna Burley? Because you hate Republicans so much, you don't want them to be on the right side of issues? Does that boil your blood? Yes. So again, this isn't about issues. It's about hating people. And just like Orwell said, getting their 5 minutes of hate on every day. That's what this is. You don't really give a shit about climate change or the war or inequality or killing brown people. You care about owning the fucking conservatives. That's what this is. It's about hating the right people. And why is it the only person in Senate was Rand Paul who wanted any oversight into this $40 billion? If you play by the rules in the United States, you are a sucker. Because guess who doesn't play by the rules? The people who are running the country. They're raping the country. And who are the people running it? You think the people in Congress run it? They're the tools of the people who run the country. Goldman Sachs, Big Pharma, and Exxon run this goddamn country. And Raytheon. And this is living proof. And it takes this guy who everybody likes to do, he's another white supremacist, according to the shit libs, to stand up against. He's not even standing up against it. Here's what all he did. Well, we have another video. We'll talk about that. Here's what's really going on.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
So that's what's going on in Ukraine. And if you're getting your news about Ukraine from the corporate media, you have no idea what's actually happening. That is what's happening. This war could be ended today if the United States wanted it to be ended, but they will not allow Zelensky. NATO will not allow him to peace negotiate with Putin. Why? Because they want to keep funneling $40 billion of aid, military lethal aid, to the military-industrial complex pockets. You're being fleeced. This is called fleecing of America. That's what this is. And that's why we're a failed state. We're a failed state. The United States is a failed state. You just can't tell yet. But we're there. And the wars were successful because the point of the wars are not to be won. The point of the wars is to transfer money from the treasuries of the government into the pockets of the people who run the military-industrial complex. And that's exactly what's happening. So, congratulations. Keep voting Democrat, you fucking idiots. Keep voting. Oh, I'm a nihilist because I won't vote for Democrat. Well, if I voted Republican now, I would be on the side of peace. You voted Democrat, you're on the side of war. What's more nihilistic than that? You just gave up. You just gave up and voted for the security state. You just gave up and voted for the military-industrial complex. You just gave up. To me, that's nihilism. Not standing up against it and refusing to participate in that evil, corrupt system, that two-party duopoly that is run by billionaires and uses people like Bernie Sanders and AOC to sheepdog progressive revolutionaries back into that same corporate duopoly. Standing up against that is actually courageous. And that's called revolutionary. And people who won't do that are the nihilists and the enablers of fucking evil. So when you see someone like Kyle Kalinske or Crystal Ball say that people who are against these wars and against the funding the Democratic Party are somehow nihilists, you know that that's called projection. They're projecting that because they don't have a fucking original idea in their head. And they're willing to go along with this goddamn two-party duopoly because it serves their fucking careers. Anything you'd like to say about that, Jackson?
All I gotta say is it's just so frustrating when you see all these members of Congress, many of the neoconservatives and neoliberals alike. Then there's only a few who are speaking out, but all the other ones are treating Ukraine as if it's like the 51st state of our country. Yes. They care more about Ukraine than about Skid Row down in downtown Los Angeles.
They care more about Ukraine than they care about Beverly Hills. Are you kidding me? They couldn't give a shit about anything or anybody in the United States except the donor class. That's it. Those are the only people who get funded. And how do they get funded? Through shit like this. This is called a fleecing. And who's participating in it? Who's not only participating, but they're the ones doing it. It's the Democrats, along with the squad, along with Ro Khanna, Mr. Anti-War. Why? Because he wants to run for president, because he is also an empty vessel and a narcissist who's pushing his own career. And shame on anybody who doesn't call him out. And shame on anybody who calls us nihilists for standing up against this shit. We're doing live stand-up shows in Cleveland, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Des Moines, Omaha, Kansas City, Las Vegas, all over the country. Go to JimmyDoreComedy.com for a link for tickets. And single tickets now available at all venues. So if you tried to buy one before and you couldn't, single tickets are now available. Plus, while you're at JimmyDoreComedy.com, why don't you become a premium member? Sign up to our mailing list so when they cancel us, we can still stay in touch.